So good morning, everybody. I'm Brad Parks with Morpheus Data. Welcome to the latest in our webinar series with 451 Research. We did one of these just a month or two ago, focused on DevOps and a little more on the cloud native application front. But today I'm thrilled to be joined by William Fellows, who I've known for a number of years, and we're going to talk about the evolution of hybrid cloud automation. It's certainly a space that we've seen change quite a bit over the last couple of years. Why don't you give an intro for yourself? You can do it much better than I.
Hey, thanks, Brad. So hi, everyone. Thanks for taking the time today. Like Brad said, we're hoping to tee this up as a sort of a bite size for you on hybrid cloud automation. I was one of the co-founders of 451 Research and look after the research associated with cloud and all things cloud native now as well.
Perfect. Well, looking forward to sharing some of the data that you guys have gathered. We're going to touch on a little bit of the data around complexity, some of the changes we've seen over the last couple of years as more and more hybrid and multi-cloud adoption has happened. Talk a little bit about some of the gaps that we're seeing in market, and particularly data that we've gotten from enterprises on what they have struggles with. Talk about where this crazy market is going, and then certainly talk just a little bit about Morpheus, but really want to focus on some of the research and get some perspectives from William. Should take about a half hour or so, and we'll get you back into your day. Jumping into that, I think it's always good to kind of take a look back. I know some of these data points may not have changed a lot over the last handful of years, but what are people trying to get out of cloud today?
Sure, thanks. 451's a technology industry analyst firm, so it would be remiss of me not to bring some data to the table here. But really, the story here is that we are now 15 years into this cloud thing. And, it's important that we don't lose sight of really what the benefits are that are accruing. So the data you can see in front of you is from our Global Alliance, which is a panel of enterprise IT end users we sort of survey on a regular basis for their spending intent. And we ask them about their key sort of cloud benefits that they've experienced. That's in the blue, and then what the primary benefit is that they've recognized in the green. And you can see here that the top three are the faster response to business need, reduced IT capital expense, and the better ability to deploy IT resources where needed. And really, I think what we're talking about here is this trifecta, of better, faster, and cheaper. And this is still really in the driving seat when it comes to the benefits that users are experiences. Breaking it down just a little, what we did find was that in the government and education sectors, improved customer satisfaction tended to be a top benefit. In smaller organizations, better security and data protection is more important. And in large organizations, it's the sort of reduced operating expenses which are more top of mind. If you want to move on to the next slide, Brad. But this comes at a price, and the price is that complexity is on the rise. And given the sort of breadth and the depth of cloud goods and services available, it's little surprise users want to find the best of these to meet their particular needs. So I think the key to success will be finding the right combinations, I suppose, and operationalizing them to deliver the benefits as sort of advertised by the suppliers. So we think that hybrid is sort of won the architectural war. It's both an architectural construct and a strategic initiative. And as cloud matures from its teenage years and it embeds itself into the mainstream of enterprise IT, organizations' attention extends beyond just the tactical IT cost considerations towards a broader vision of incorporating public cloud resources and platforms and so on into integrated IT estates. So when we asked our survey group, our Global Alliance, what best describes the organization's overall IT approach and strategy, now 58% of organizations say they've implemented or planning to implement hybrid IT environments that integrate on-premise, off-premise, public cloud and hosted resources. And interestingly, only 18% have an all-in public cloud approach. If you want to move to the next slide. So what does this really mean? Now, this is looks like a complicated slide, but it's not, and it has drawn some fairly obvious conclusions from all of these kind of inputs. So what's going on here? What we think is that there's this kind of perfect storm of factors which has only increased with COVID, and there's a risk that cloud complexity in these hybrid environments may sort of spiral out of control, and organizations need to make sure they're using the right services, managing the right way, at the right price, and so on an ongoing basis to prevent this complexity getting out of control. So let's take a look at the forces acting here. So first of all, over on the left-hand side, the drivers, excuse me. So in the first case, 53% of organizations, it turns out, are using more cloud as COVID has kind of increased cloud adoption through the need to change business models and aid remote working and so on. Second, it's forced sort of urgency on enterprises. Rapid implementation has been prioritized over long-term management and optimization. So for example, in our alliance, 20% of those have said they've delayed or canceled DevOps projects. Moreover, nearly 50% say that now cost saving is a greater driver than it used to be. It's a greater priority. So on the right hand side of this chart, we're looking at some of these other secondary drivers here. What else is acting on this? Well, as we saw, multi-cloud and hybrid adoption are now sort of mainstream. And then add to this the continued and rapid release of, lots of new services, both infrastructure, fully managed software as a service, multi-cloud control planes, as well as the new hyperscaler regions. And businesses are now faced with this huge number of decisions to make and choices to navigate. So at 451, our cloud price index now tracks more than 2.5 million cloud services available from 176 it is now data center locations around the globe from the major hyperscale providers. So those are the sort of drivers and exacerbators. If we turn to the bottom and look at the inhibitors, these are some of the things which are sort of moving the needle in the other direction. So first of all, compute optimized virtual machine prices are down by 15%. This is reflected in our cloud price index. And there's now a large range of sort of custom silicon and GPUs and so on. And in 2020, there were about 4,000 significant price cuts across all of those services. So let's now turn to the risks that's in the middle in the red. And the problem here is that complexity doesn't resolve itself. It's entropy, which is the property that describes this disorder as a system flows from a state of order into a state of disorder. And we identified 3 risks in the forms of laws, if you like, that describe how the scale of cloud makes it more susceptible to complexity due to its nature to flow towards disorder. First of all, this law of scalability, which we think about as a cloud application left unmanaged would tend towards greater resource consumption over time. And the law of cloud entropy is that increasing scale left unmanaged tends towards increasing disorder, complexity, and frankly, more fragility. And then the law of complexity, that the longer the period of resolution, the longer the period between resolution of disorder, the more effort is required to resolve it. And you can see here in the yellow, the impact is that, the uncontrolled costs can spiral. And for organizations, they've told us that, that both the technical complexity and cost are key challenges for them. And these laws don't just apply to compute infrastructure, whether we're talking about objects in a storage bucket, records in a database, data in a machine learning model, or sensors in IoT deployment. It's more likely that the number of things to track will increase over time rather than decrease, which is a sort of a vicious cycle. So the deployment of more resources and services obviously leads to increased complexity and higher costs. And the longer it takes to optimize them, to deliver business value, the more complex the IT estate becomes. Resolving this isn't a one-time process. It requires constant reassessment and optimization. It requires tools, yes, but it requires human expertise as well. So then we come to the solution in the green, and it's clear that humans alone can't manage all of this complexity that we've just talked about, and that really it's going to be automation, which is an imperative now for sort of modern IT organizations. So we think a combination of automation and IT and business planning, especially as we move beyond the pandemic, is going to be the key here. If you want to move on to the next slide.
Yeah, that is a lot to unpack. This is a big slide. I think a cloud in
Yeah,
motion stays in motion. I don't know what the netted out, but yeah, we could probably do a whole webinar on
yeah. So
investment.
what we did here was to aggregate data from the demand side research, as well as obviously the pricing data that we get from the hyperscalers to arrive at this. But it's a good way, like you said, to think about all of the different forces that are acting here, and drawing some conclusions about the fact that there are some some very definite motions which all of these are delivering, whether it's entropy or complexity and so on.
No,
So if you want to move on to the next slide. So I think, well, despite the years of propaganda that it was the sort of the wrong way or the false cloud or whatever, the hybrid and multi-cloud has won this architecture war, and it's the new reality. It offers a kind of a best of all worlds, hopefully. In the early years of cloud, hybrid was, well, it was something that just ended up happening a bit like life. But certainly where there were different groups in the organization using different clouds, things that got acquired, and so on. Now, of course, it's an explicit IT strategy and a design point. And indeed, when we asked our survey group, now how many cloud vendors they have in use. So, nearly 80% have got more than one vendor in use, and nearly half of those with more than one vendor say that 80% of their usage is with a primary vendor. So there's typically a primary and a secondary vendor. If you want to move on to the next slide, Brett. So when we asked them, well, okay, so what are the most important reasons why you're using these things? It's clear that getting access to the best and the specific capabilities to meet particular needs is really the key driver here, and then being able to use that to optimize for cost across the IT estate. It was interesting that the vendor lock-in is not such an issue, rather the benefits that accrue from doing these things. And just as some of the sort of collateral data that surfaced with this was that organizations have an average of 2.3 cloud infrastructure or platform as a service providers, that the degree of multi-cloudness, if you like, the number of clouds in use is largely a function of the company's size. We do find that AWS with Azure is way out in front as the most common usage pattern, but interestingly that amongst Google Cloud Platform and Oracle users, that IBM has the most cross usage there.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. We've seen, in hundreds of customers that we've talked to, that multi-cloud is almost an inevitability. Between M&A, different teams accessing different public cloud PaaS services, it's definitely increased in problem domain for the folks we're talking with over the last couple of years. So I guess brings us to, so what, yeah, what is an enterprise to do, and where, where are they struggling? What are some of
Sure. So, and really, from our side, that means also, and really from the supply side, that means, well, what is the opportunity for innovation here? So, so this is this marks a bit of a turning point, I suppose, because so far we've talked a lot about infrastructure and automation, but successful transformation and so on, also depends upon the skills that you have to get this done. And every organization now is becoming a services company, creating digital services to better engage with customers and partners and suppliers, and quite frankly just compete in the digital economy. Well, the currency of this economy is software, and every company is having to sort of raise its software IQ in order to transform successfully. And what we're finding is that the access to talent now is more of a constraint than the access to capital. And it's no longer so much a question of a choice of build or buy. It's build or die. Really, cloud programmers, cloud developers, cloud native engineers. These are the folks who can solve, major business problems and help create the sort of hit products for customers, not, just sort of grinding through the rote tasks. So, we asked our survey group which skills are most acutely lacking, for managing IT, and you can see there that the cloud platform and cloud native come out squarely on top here. More for large organizations, especially those with a large spend and a large number of employees. And in fact, although it's not on here specifically, we found that only 15% of organizations told us that they didn't have any skill shortages related to the management of cloud. And clearly there are there are gaps here when it comes to security, DevOps, machine learning, and so on as well. Those are also in short supply. So how does this translate into the organization? So if you want to move on to the next slide, Brad. So when I say translate into the organization, I mean, so what roles are these? What new roles are emerging that are important in the ability to deliver this? What personas? These might be operational personas, but they could well be buying personas as well. Now, as procurement, has to involve many different groups across organizations. So, we've asked what the emerging, the current roles are in purple and the planned roles in blue. And I think it's pretty clear here that that it's really just capabilities integral to cloud operations at scale, right? And overall IT and digital transformation are the ones that are emerging here across DevOps and cloud, security, automation, and so on. Again, they're more prevalent in larger organizations and indeed sort of cloud mature organizations. So if we can move on again, Brad. So circling back then to hybrid IT, and we've bounced around from the tech to the automation to the services and the complexity that's available to some of the sort of software and engineering, some of the organizational pieces. How does this all sort of fit together? So hybrids sort of now become a de facto, operating model. And these, it's going to be with us for years. And it's now really that the hard work begins. And what I mean is enhancing the IT management frameworks with automation and orchestration to support optimization and, generally the needs of a modern digital era IT. And I think what we can see is that there are still glaring gaps in the hybrid and multi-cloud value chain. It's clearly not a bed of roses. And we asked our alliance whether hybrid IT is exceeding, meeting, falling short of expectations. And it does seem that hybrid IT is delivering on expectations, as you can see here at the top, when it comes to application scaling and life cycle support. So the blue is meeting expectations, the green is exceeding, and the yellow is falling short. So 80% of organizations here with hybrid IT, say that their environments are meeting or exceeding expectations, but there are performance gaps, it seems, when it comes to a single sort of management framework, as you can see, for disparate IT environments, for cloud and software assets, for workload migration and cost optimization. And most sort of glaringly, we can see at the bottom of this chart in the red box is the more important operational element here, I think, which is bringing all these disparate environments together under a single management framework. Well, this remains, it looks, largely aspirational, as indicated by the 34% of organizations say that, it's falling short on this front. And the converse here is that really we think that that is a massive opportunity for innovation. So, we think, if you think back to all of that complexity that we talked about, bringing this all together, this is where there are on the one hand there are the gaps, but on the other, these present an opportunity for innovation on the supply side of this market. So I think, Brad, you're going to tell us a little bit about that, right?
Yeah, well, selfishly, that is definitely where where Morpheus comes in, right? Our goal is to help simplify that cross cloud control plane. But before I kind of pivot and jump into a quick Morpheus 101, kind of data aside, you've been studying this market for a long time. Is that the crux where tools and technology meets people and process? What's the end game, or is there one? How do we make progress?
Well, so yeah, good question. So I think if we think about go back to the teenager sort of metaphor. When you become a teenager, you think you know everything, but it turns out you don't. And in the cloud, I think users are now finding out what they don't know, especially when now they're operating at scale with multiple clouds and large monthly spends and so on. Wow, suddenly, there's a ton of complexity. So how do I deal with that? And although hybrid cloud is kind of poised to provide organizations with this flexibility to navigate, this sort of climate, it also comes with a lot of additional visibility and management challenges, I think, that needs to be addressed. So the next phase of hybrid IT and so on is going to move beyond just the optimization and visibility. It will be automated provisioning and policy configuration and governance and performance of observability and so on. But the key here is going to be embracing automation, because these are not all going to be able to be undertaken by humans. And it's not only about current state and remediation, but also to deal with the ongoing optimization. I think the sort of the next step is if you like, making all of these processes subject to inspection and able to use the kind of automation that thinks for itself in order to achieve the required sort of efficiency and connectivity and so on. And I think we are certainly talking about some of the excuse me, the constructs we hear about, whether it's AI ops or machine learning and so on. I think we're within sight of applications being able to select and maintain the environment they require on their own using automation. And there are already indications from the supply side of vendors working on approaches that enables code that can either write or rewrite itself as well. So I think when all of those things come together, that's really going to deliver this kind of next phase of hybrid cloud automation. That I'd also say it appears difficult to sort of get started with, and our counsel is always, well, to start with some sort of
Start somewhere. Yeah.
easy wins, I suppose. And if you,
Yes,
you know, and
definitely.
the best practice as well, if the results are better than what you have right
Mhm.
now, then it's definitely a sort of a call for action, wherever you are.
Yeah. Yeah, it can definitely seem overwhelming. Yeah, starting somewhere is a piece. Well, sounds like Skynet is within reach. Hopefully, we don't go full Terminator, but with yeah, with a kid going off to college, next year out of state, your teenage analogy definitely rings true. Going off into the wild. Well, let's pivot and talk a little bit about Morpheus. What are we about, and how might we be able to help bridge some of those gaps that William hit on? So we agree, violently that yes, the world is definitely getting more complex. We see that complexity in a few different angles. Definitely cloud endpoints, but expanding that to platforms themselves, right? You've got, a healthy mix of on-premises stacks that might be, VMware based. Obviously, Nutanix has done a great job on their HCI platform, but that can also be, bare metal, OpenStack, other on-prem stacks that are still there, and then the public clouds that you mentioned. Workload placement, certainly we're seeing from our customers traditionally has been that mix from a hybrid perspective of on-prem private cloud and public cloud, but more and more we are talking to a lot of large telcos, retail chains, where the edge is yet another destination where they want self-service, they want elasticity, those hallmarks of cloud. And then tooling. I mean, one of the things I joke, I don't think I have the slide in this deck, but I've never run into a customer that has a lack of tools, right? More often than not, they have lots of tools that are not meaningfully brought to bear on the outcome. I liken it to the old Windows update status bar, like the last 10%, right? You think you're almost there. That's where your computer hangs for 3 hours while it's figuring itself out. I think that's where we are, at least what we see in a lot of our enterprise customers, is they've got all of the software definable tooling, but bringing them to bear together to enable hybrid cloud is what we aim to solve, right? Bringing that last mile. From a gaps perspective, you hit on some of the expectations around between IT and the business, and really they need to come together if they're going to solve that complexity crisis. The gaps between dev and ops. One of the things we saw, and I'd be interested in your perspective, particularly within 2020, you touched on some of the changes in priorities, but looked like for us, the customers where we had already been engaged, they'd already deployed an automation framework. It seemed like they were able to pivot faster than those who were caught flat-footed. So this distance between what I call the haves and the have-nots seemed to increase over 2020. I don't know if you had any insight or patterns that you saw.
Yeah, so I think starting with some easy wins and sort of avoiding some of the the washing or the marketing anyway that's going on out there is important. But you know, it does show that I think it does suggest that there are real benefits to this and to getting started early, even if it's just in small projects or small beginnings anyway.
Mhm. Oh, good insight. Well, let's speaking of getting out of the marketing and into the real, let's talk a little bit about Morpheus, what we bring to bear on the problem domain. I'm going to go through it pretty quick. Definitely invite people to come back, request a demo. We can go as deep down the rabbit hole as you'd like. But for us, and really more broadly, if we think about what makes a cloud, on demand, elastic scalability are hallmarks of cloud. They also happen to be hallmarks of a high functioning DevOps organization, right? Self-service is the common denominator, and it's really where Morpheus starts. It's the common use case for all of our customers. You've got a classic IT ops function who has to navigate all of that complexity, and you've got a development team or an end user who simply wants to deploy an application service and get on with their job. So that's what we bring to this equation. For us, when we're thinking about self-service, that could be as simple as a base OS. I just need a virtual machine, but it really gets more interesting when we're talking to customers. Good example: AstraZeneca is one of our big lighthouse customers. They've got data scientists, researchers who they want to deploy a a database service very quickly to then apply some analytics for some of their research. So how do you think about modeling those applications in a consistent way and then turning the keys over to the end users who are really going to benefit from them? One of the other things that we've seen change over the last couple of years is the makeup of the types of users that are approaching hybrid cloud as an end user, wanting those application services. It can vary. We've got certainly classic power users who want to be able to select their choices, set their networks, configure their storage, but they want to do it in a simple way. We've got developers who really hate the GUI and want to jump in and deal with us programmatically as part of their development pipelines. But more and more, we're seeing non-technical end users who want a simple, easy button. It could be a grad student at a university, a data scientist at a research house, a business user who's doing some analytics. That's where we bring to bear different personas around self-service so everybody gets what they need. Now, one of the other patterns that we've seen in hundreds of enterprise deployments is there's always some key, I'll call them personas, stakeholders, business groups within an enterprise that need to be satisfied. Everyone has their own KPIs that they're measured against, their own kind of critical needs that need to be met. And for hybrid cloud to be successfully navigated, you have to satisfy all of those needs. And it probably speaks to why bridging that cross-cloud control plane gap was one of the high wants, but kind of dissatisfaction points for a lot of customers. So if you're trying to design for self-service, first and foremost, the platform engineering team is a group that we've seen emerge quite a bit over the last couple of years. Those new roles that William, you mentioned, I think are starting to coalesce around a team inside an enterprise that is tasked with bringing the cloud experience on-prem, while also bringing on-prem control into public clouds. More and more, we see platform engineering teams also inheriting and catching the ball when it comes to Kubernetes. Oftentimes, there's still a fragmented approach to Kubernetes and cluster management within large organizations. Second key group that has to be satisfied is the security team. As more and more people are looking at DevSecOps, right? How do you make sure that each group is only able to provision the items that are controlled and governed by IT? Are security profiles being met? Is compliance being taken care of? Are you looking for vulnerabilities within those stacks? Third key stakeholder, and really what drove the adoption of cloud in the first place, particularly public cloud, was development teams that were bypassing some of the entropy and the inertia that was existing within IT 5-10 years ago. So for developers, they need to be able to use the tools that they want, the open source projects that they want, without being slowed down. It's where a lot of classic CMP fell short, right? They satisfied the needs of the ops side of the equation, but if it put too many handcuffs on development teams, they simply continued to go around. So for us, we want to make sure both dev and ops are treated as first-class citizens. And then lastly, the key area that we saw, and I think it even shown out in some of your data, particularly in 2020, no IT function got any new projects approved if they weren't addressing the needs of the finance part of their organization. So for Morpheus, that means the ability to connect to existing hypervisors, existing public cloud accounts, inventory what's happening, and then provide recommendations on how people might be able to reduce resource consumption, shut down VMs that weren't being used, apply power schedules, and bring some sanity to the public cloud invoicing dilemma, because we have talked to finance teams who are having to go into 3 different public cloud portals, pull down database formats of invoicing data, and then chew through that to try and look for savings opportunities. So we want to be able to pull this full stack together and apply it to those hybrid cloud domains that William, you touched on. One level down from a technical perspective, right? We are a platform framework. We have built a set of abstractions that let us very quickly install either inside the data center on a customer premises or up in the public cloud. But once we're installed, we're able to very quickly connect to all of those tools that are already there. And for us, when we say we integrate, we want that to be a very fast experience. If we're not installed, connected to VMware and AWS, and enabling self-service within a couple of hours, our field engineers are pretty disappointed in their POC deployments. So simply opening up a dialog box, entering in your API endpoint for a given integration, and tying in some service credentials, we're going to take the ball from there. So time to value, I think, is important. You even mentioned it, William. Just start somewhere. Don't try and eat, the entire elephant all at one time. If you can get some easy wins, get going quickly, you're going to learn, you're going to iterate. Our DNA really came from DevOps and Agile teams inside of our parent organization. So that's what we're all about. Starting with a given use case and then expanding from there. So if that previous slide talked to kind of how organizations are deploying and managing the life cycle of their applications, the other dimension, flipping at 90 degrees, is where are those applications landing? And you touched on this, right? Hybrid cloud is the reality. When we talk to customers, that 2 to 3 clouds that you hit on definitely rings true. And that can be a mix of on-premises stacks as well as public cloud stacks, and more, not just IaaS instances, but being able to consume the cloud native services as people are developing net new applications. We have really the broadest set of cloud endpoints that we support in this industry, and we do see that coming to bear as we're navigating with large enterprises. So that was the kind of at a glance Morpheus stack. I know it was a lot to throw at you. We really didn't want this to be a product pitch. Really wanted to suck some of the data and the insight from the 451 team, and hopefully you saw a little bit of that. We'd love to follow up though if some of those gaps that William hit on were of interest. Some of what I touched on from a product capability ring true. Please jump on with one of our engineers. We'd love to learn more about your specific challenges, where your skill gaps are, to see how we can apply this platform framework to shrinking that distance between aspirations and expectations. So with that, I guess any closing comments, William, or any? I was looking at some of the questions from the field. I think we've covered all of them throughout the course of the last half hour or so, but love to hear any closing insights from you.
Yeah, well, just one thing sort of strikes me in terms of the outcome here is that, again, although we've been talking about the infrastructure, what the consumers of technology, they expect to sort of be able now to access and assemble and pay for this stuff without any requiring any specific knowledge of the underlying physical infrastructure, unless they specifically need it. And I think, a lot of the what's being achieved here is to actually, abstract and insulate the user from having to deal with this stuff. So leaving it to the operations teams and letting the expensive developers get on with developing rather than, worrying about managing infrastructure and so on and so forth. So, letting those important groups get on with what they're doing, without having to be concerned about a lot of this stuff. So in other words, it's a lot of the other effect that that it has on organizations in terms of freeing up time, expertise, and so on to get on with innovating for the business.
No, spot on. It was actually, we had a talk back with one of our customers a couple of weeks ago. It was a VP of an INO for a very large organization. He was just talking to us about his own journey inside the organization, working with different stakeholders. And one of the ones that came up was the development team, who had said, "Hey, we've gone down this path before. We don't want another tool from INO. We're going to go write our own framework using Terraform, Ansible, sheer manpower. We're going to script our way around this. We don't really need you." And he was able to kind of talk to them and say, yes, you can do that. Like, we will, if you want to, if you want to go do that yourself, but let's unpack that and look at what you're signing up for, right? It's not just cloning a VM and applying some some application logic. You're taking on the technical debt of writing those CI updates into the CMDB. You're going to make sure you're capturing all the usage data and the policy information. So when finance is crawling down my throat, I can just point at you, right? You're going to, take on the work of, patching and maintaining and updating those systems when they're down, assuring that backup policy is met. So how much time are you going to have to actually go develop the app that, is going to change our business? And really that dialogue shined a spotlight on why, why abstractions exist, and why, if you can simplify that landscape, you can get those expensive developers focused back on helping the business differentiate.
Exactly.
So no, good story. Well, with that, I do want to make sure we give everybody a little bit of time back in their day. I want to thank you, William, for jumping on. Always a pleasure sharing the mic with you. If anyone has any questions or follow-up, you can definitely reach out to us on some of the links we have here, and do take a look at some of the upcoming events. We've always got something new in the pot. We release updates about every 4 weeks, so plenty of things to jump into. So with that, I'll say thanks and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks a lot.